At Islandbridge, our mission has always been to help exceptional people thrive. And over the last couple of years, our perspective has continued to develop. And this podcast has really helped shape some of our thinking beyond just the traditional ideas and stewardship of wealth. It's actually helped us to define what it means to be a purpose-driven multifamily office. One that allocates not just financial capital, but thinks deeply about human and intellectual capital too. Now, over the past 2 years, that question, what does it mean to act with purpose, has become central not just to this podcast, but to who we are as a firm. And now, as we reach 26 episodes in 2026, we wanted to take a moment to look back and run through some of our key takeaways. We've been on our own path to purpose at Islandbridge, and this episode today is really a chance to share some of those lessons that helped us live it. We've begun to think that the quest for purpose is somewhat of a modern preoccupation, a privilege. However, speaking to Blue Zone's founder, Dan Buettner, was a great reminder that the quest for purpose is actually an ancient and essential part of life. You've also got a vocabulary around purpose that you've identified in these zones as well. Can you talk us through what you discovered on that side?
Yeah, so all of these blue zones have a vocabulary for purpose. It often comes with mother's milk. They don't have this existential stress of what's my place in society or what should I be doing. There's always an expectation that they're committed to the community. They're committed to their family. In many places, there's a religion. In Okinawa, they have this word ikigai, which roughly means the reason for which I wake up in the morning. A new blue zone I'm working on in the South Pacific, there's a word kuleana, which is kind of a blend of purpose and altruism. So you're not just pursuing your hobby in sports car racing or your favorite sports team. There's always a dimension of it where you're doing what you love and what you're good at, but for somebody else.
Yeah. Dan describes purpose as something shared, embedded in family, community, and a contribution to others. It reminds us that the most profound impact does not always come from wealth alone. That must be anchored towards personal alignment also. And that takes us back to our episode with the Happy Pair founders, Dave and Steve Flynn, who showed us what it looks like to translate those ideas into our everyday life. What would you advise to people that are looking to bring more purpose into their businesses and entrepreneurs who are looking to make that next step from where they are today?
I think it starts with the personal. I think each person has to start with themselves, because it's very easy to sit there and you've built a business, but it's been highly stressful. You've stressed out loads of people. You've fired people. You've created a negative ripple energetically, but you've got more money in your bank. You might have a fancy car and a fancy house and these type of things, but you might be dissatisfied. So I think it starts with each person in themselves and making peace with themselves, becoming more integrated and aligned with themselves.
What does that mean?
Their own values. Say if their purpose is to, say for example, Islandbridge Capital is about creating more, purposeful venture. It's investing in more purpose-based companies. So that would start with each person as their individual going, well, what are my values? A lot of people say, well, family is the most important thing to them. But then if you look at how they spend their time, they spend 2 hours on a Saturday with their family. They work most of the week, Monday to Friday, and they spend very little time in their family. Whereas to really become the embodiment of your values, you kind of need to look at what's important and how am I applying my time to this. So I think it starts with each person. And there's that aspect of, reflecting on how you're spending your time. And I think there has to be oftentimes there is these coming to Jesus moments where nowadays a lot of people, it comes when they get sick. They get sick or someone dies.
Or they have a breakdown.
They have a breakdown or a burnout. There's these kind of moments which make people reflect and go, oh my God, I'm so out of alignment here. I'm a workaholic that drinks way too much alcohol. My health I've completely neglected. And oh my God, it's taken this massive event to make me aware of this. But I think each person in every moment and every day can go, well, why don't I take time out? Like, I'm working so hard, or maybe my purpose is completely misaligned. Maybe I'm in a career that doesn't fulfill me. Maybe I'm much more suited to helping children or working in a school, or maybe it doesn't have to be a status-based job. It could be something else that feels like it's more purpose-based for each person as an individual.
So it starts with the psychology of the leader influencing the company, if that's where it's trying to change what it's doing.
Yeah, I think it starts with each person as the individual. It has to start with the individual, and then it goes from there.
The allocation of time was a recurring theme that we found on the podcast, and that was brought into sharp focus by repeat founder and digital pioneer Martha Lane Fox when she joined us last year. After surviving a catastrophic car accident, she became brutally clear about how she spends her time and who she spends it with. She also gave us a 3-step framework on how she thinks about mapping her time to her purpose.
But I do think that, especially as I've got older and post the catastrophic car accident that I have, I am just very, very brutal with my time. I mean, I have to be, partly because I'm physically not quite as able as I used to be, and partly because there's too many interesting things and I would be scattered all over the place. So when I'm thinking about things, I think about sort of 3 questions in my mind, and I don't know if they articulate a purpose, but they're what I think about. And the first is, will I look back in 10 years' time and feel proud of this thing? Will it feel like it's had impact? Is it something that feels, and I don't mean this in a grand way, sort of trivial, but just will I point to something that feels meaningful from it? The second thing is, will I be able to work with a diverse set of voices, or will I be able to open the door to a more diverse set of voices doing this thing? Because that's incredibly important, and something that, particularly in this climate, I think we've all got to keep striving for. And the final thing is, will I be using and understanding and learning about the tools of the modern age? So does this feel like something that's operating in a model that's, more like 1850 or 1950, or is it actually thinking about 2050? And I want to keep learning and keep challenging myself to be in the modern world. So those are the 3 things. And I approach the things I do with that in mind, but mainly with an overarching principle of, work hard and be kind.
Well, the topic of time kept resurfacing across the podcast, and it wasn't long before that led us to people. Because behind every decision, every investment, every outcome, there's a team somewhere. At Islandbridge, we talk about being on the same team with our clients, our colleagues, and the founders we back. Collaboration matters to us, but it only works if you're choosing the right people. Bolt founder Marcus Fillig has a straightforward way of thinking about that. What's hard to change in people, what you can teach, and what really lasts.
What I found over time is that it's really important to look at what are the immutable attributes of a person and what are the things you can teach them. And what I found is that there's generally 3 things that are very hard to change in people, which is drive and intelligence and integrity. So some people just innately are extremely hardworking, optimistic. They really want to compete in the highest leagues. They want to change the world. And they found it's very hard to change that in a person who don't have that sort of attribute and then mentality. So that's absolutely something we look for before anything else. The other thing is intelligence. And by that, we don't mean necessarily an IQ test, but what we've seen is just some people are extremely curious. They want to learn about new fields. They're not stuck in some fixed mindset. And again, it's very hard to change in people. If somebody has this fixed mindset, we haven't been able to really change that. At least we are not able to do that. So that's sort of the second attribute we look for. And then third, we look for integrity. So if you have somebody who's very driven, very intelligent, then you also need them to be a good team player, to care about the company, be able to put the interests of the customers above their own. And again, that doesn't come very naturally to everybody. So again, that's something we try to weed out during the interview process. And everything else in terms of specific skills, how impressive is their CV, etc. We don't really care about that too much. It of course matters for some specific roles. If you're a hiring accountant, sure, they need specific experience in that. But generally look for these more general attributes.
Marcus talks about drive as one of the hardest things to teach, yet one of the most powerful forces in building anything meaningful. Over the course of this podcast, we've learned that drive can be a double-edged sword. When it's grounded in integrity and directed towards others, it can change the world. When it's focused purely on status, validation, and personal achievement, it can leave even the most successful people feeling hollow. No one illustrated that lesson more powerfully than the late Dr. James Doty, neurosurgeon, best-selling author, and founder of the Stanford Center for Compassion.
So, like many people, young people, we want to be quote unquote successful by what we think of as typical society standards. And that typically is associated with power, position, money. And once we get those, we think our life is going to be perfect and we're going to be happy. And for me, I went to medical school. I became a neurosurgeon, a professor at Stanford University. I became a successful entrepreneur, made millions of dollars. And with each of these accomplishments, I would think, okay, I've done this. Wow, I'm at the top of the hill. And now I'm going to be happy. And every time I climbed that mountain, there was nothing there for me. And the reason is because I was looking for outside affirmation, people to tell me I was okay, I was successful. And what I found was that it never worked. I never felt okay. In fact, from my own background, I carried a lot of shame and insecurity. And other people telling me I was okay did not help me feel okay. And ultimately, what happened is after, if you will, climbing this mountain to typical societal standards of success, during the dot-com crisis, I had heavily invested in a few companies, and most of my net worth was tied up in there. And during the dot-com crisis, I ended up losing $80 million or so. And at that time, that was not an insignificant sum of money. So my penthouse in San Francisco with the private elevator, my Ferraris, my Porsches, essentially everything that I had sort of thought was important and would make me whole and show people that I was whole, it all went away. And in fact, I had a villa in Florence that also went away, and an island I was purchasing in New Zealand. And here I was reflecting on what happened. I went through a deep reflection. And I wrote a book about some aspects of this called Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart, which ended up being a New York Times bestseller and a bestseller in 8 countries. It's translated into 36 languages. But the reason I mention that is I tell this story because I ended up actually reflecting on what happened. And in the story of the trajectory of my life, I had met a woman who taught me techniques of not only how to deal with my own personal trauma, but how to overcome it. And this was through mindfulness practices and manifesting my intentions, if you will. And so I went back to reflect on what she had taught me. And I'd met this woman when I was 12 or 13. And I realized that I could not become happy by external affirmation. Only I could allow myself to become happy. And while I was never a bad person, I was always focused on the next achievement. And that's really about yourself, what I want, and showing people that you're successful. But I realized through that period of reflection that what would make me whole and fill the emptiness that I was feeling was actually to be of service to others. And so I changed my entire orientation. Certainly being a doctor, you're of service to others, but all of my things to that period of time were really about me. And when I changed how I looked at the world to be of service, to do things for others, to have that always be the primary focus, everything changed. And what I tell people is I went from rags, if you will, to riches, and then to rags. And even though I was $3 million in debt at that time, it was still the best decision I made.
Another thread that ran through the podcast is that purpose rarely arrives as a clean plan. It's often shaped by things you didn't choose and clarified over time. New York Times bestselling author and investigative journalist Annie Jacobsen speaks to that directly. She makes room for the unknown, but she also talks about what you can control, sticking with what you love and being ready for when opportunity arrives.
I mean, that's where I have to say I think fate and circumstance come into it.
Got it.
And that's not meant to sound mysterious. It simply is mysterious. And that is something I always lean into, which is that if you were, it's like fortune favors the prepared mind, as Pasteur said. If you just love something deeply and you stick with it, opportunities happen. They do. That's my experience. And I really know that to be true, and I it's important to me to be able to share that because I believe it to my core.
So when we sat down with Diego Piacentini, we learned that even with great people, teams can still drift into consensus. It's one of the quieter risks in any smart room. You've aligned, you've moved fast, and you accidentally stop interrogating what's true. Diego talks about how understanding complexity requires a radical commitment to the truth, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient, something he learned building Amazon with Jeff Bezos.
And it's not necessarily a negative behavior to go after the truth, even though that could cost a lot of pain. Let me tell you how that started. Because it's literally, I remember we used to have, I think they still have it, I don't know if they still have it, we used to have a book club where Jeff or others, we would choose a book, read the book, and then comment at the esteem level and see if it was something useful for us. There are some specific. And during one of those meetings, Jeff came with a concept, we must have read it somewhere, for which he explained one thing. He said, look at the ceiling here, and the ceiling is how much? How tall is the ceiling? You're going to say it's 4 meters. I'm going to say 3 meters 80. And most companies, in most social conglomerates, the answer is 390, which is the exact average between what you say and what I say. The right answer is, let's look for a ladder. Let's look for a tape. Let's get up the ladder. The right answer takes time. And the right answer is probably 4.01 or 3.97. Most companies compromise. We need to go after the truth, even if the truth is, and especially is, tiresome, sometimes boring and annoying, takes effort, but you have to do it because you need to be looking at the exact data to take those decisions. And that moment for me was like another of those, oh, haha. Because I think I was like that, but if you don't have mentors that shows you that way, you lose that.
And there we have it, a masterclass from Diego, as he teaches us the invaluable life lesson that searching for the truth might be the harder option that takes more time, but it will always, always play out to be the best option in the long haul. Now, Peter Fernhead continued this theme, but also added the importance of authenticity, integrity, and how that compounds over time. They were some of the values that allowed him to build Africa Parks to managing over 22 million acres of land in Africa. Peter's insistence on radical authenticity reinforced why we believe execution matters.
Influence should be completely authentic. So if you're trying to put a spin on anything to anyone, whether it's to a government, whether it's to a donor, or whether it's to a staff member that's going to be sent out into a high risk area, I think you are doing a disservice to your long-term vision of what you're trying to achieve. So being completely authentic and completely honest about what we can do, how we can do it, what the conditions are, I think it's really, really important to be that. And I think by being genuine, by being authentic, I think that just adds to your credibility. It might not be what everyone wants to hear in the moment, but I think if you keep saying it, it also means you're never going to trip yourself up along the journey because they're never going to say, oh, but you said. And a lot of these societies, particularly very, very local societies, they remember every word that you say. And if you've overpromised and underdelivered, they're going to hold you to account. So being authentic, being honest with them, being realistic is, and again, whether it's a president, whether it's a very, very local community member, whether it's a multi-billionaire or whether it is a tourist, just be authentic, be honest. And that at the end of the day, I think is probably it's not going to help in the very, very short term, but I think in the medium to long term always plays itself out.
Now, Peter's approach is also helpful as we move on to another super complex issue and linked to a purpose that reoccurred across many of our conversations, which is the risk and opportunity of climate change and the energy transition. We were lucky enough to be joined by Wall Street legend Tom Steyer as he delivered a masterclass on climate investing and how it can deliver both impact and returns. Crucially, Tom reminded us that in this pursuit, family wealth gives you choice. Family wealth, do you think it's got a place to be able to invest differently in the climate solution than other institutional corporate actors?
I think one of the great things about climate wealth is it's your choice. You don't have to answer to somebody else. It's your life. You started by asking me, please articulate your purpose, and I tried to give you an answer.
Yeah.
I think every family has a right to do that. And so, from my point of view, I think not only the people in our family, but you get a choice of what you want to do while you're on this earth. And for a family, you don't have to answer to some anonymous person who claims to have hired you strictly for the bottom line. You can actually think about, what is the right thing to do. My argument is you don't have to give up return to invest in climate. I believe there's a huge tailwind to investing in climate, and that we're at a place where you can have your cake and eat it.
Now, any discussion of family wealth will, of course, require the need to think deeply and thoughtfully about what legacy is left for the next generation. During our excellent conversation with Professor of Neuroscience and best-selling author Ian Robertson, we spoke about building confidence and managing anxiety in future generations. So practically, how can you build confidence then in someone while at the same time giving them the resilience where they persevere through failure? Because that seems to be part of building confidence too, along with the success.
Well, you have to give them the opportunities to fail.
Yeah.
So you have to put them in situations where they have to take action where there's no guarantee of success, and then because when they do that and they get a success, they'll get a big surge of reward in their brains that will make them feel good. Whereas if they do something that's very easy, or which they perceive as being the result of other people's efforts. So if you're a parent and you say, "Oh, I'm going to get my son into the best sports or school or whatever it is," the more the parent does, the risk is that the child then perceives whatever success he or she has as externally caused by the parent and not internally generated by him or her. So this is the notion of control, of locus of control, of feeling internally driven rather than externally controlled.
Okay, so can you just expand on that control point?
Yeah. Well, control is the belief that in agency, that there's things you can do that will alter what happens to you in the world. And the opposite of that is helplessness. Where after great trauma, some people develop what the great psychologist Martin Seligman called learned helplessness, where you lose the perception of the relationship between response and reward. And it seems that whether bad or good things happen to you are independent of your actions. And that loss of a perception of control of agency is hugely, hugely disabling. And it can happen not just in traumatic environments, it can happen in very rich environments as well, where rewards come independent of effort. Mm. And then you can get a kind of learned helplessness which is demotivating, lowers mood, increases anxiety. And so, people need to feel that what they do matters in terms of what happens to them.
Professor Ian Robertson reminded us that confidence is built through resilience, by facing challenge, not avoiding it. That idea has felt especially relevant as we've explored how to stay grounded and hopeful in a world where geopolitical risks are rising, institutions are fracturing, and technology is racing ahead. Now that takes me back to our conversation with the former UK Foreign Secretary and the CEO of International Rescue Committee, David Miliband. He captured that tension perfectly, arguing that optimism isn't about ignoring reality, but about choosing action and holding on to shared values when the world feels fragmented. I know you get asked this all the time, but you've got a very articulate answer to it. How do you remain hopeful?
I remain hopeful by commending to people this fantastic phrase that I learned from a film crew that went to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. If you look at the statistics, you get depressed. If you look at the people, you have hope. And I think that's very powerful. I tried to develop that further. I did a lecture in Cambridge last November, Cambridge, UK. And I said, look, what keeps the learnings, the three learnings I've had about how to stay hopeful and optimistic, other than just remembering the world has more resources to do more good than any time in human history. One, a bias to action, and our organization has a bias to action. Two, an embrace of risk. In our innovation fund, we have a 40% failure rate. That's good, not bad. If we had no failure in our innovation fund, we wouldn't be trying enough things. And third, to speak to universal values, because if we don't hold on to them, then we're all lost.
Well, there we go. What wise words to end our review on. And looking back on these moments makes me realize that this podcast didn't give us a single definition of purpose. It gave us a discipline to go deeper, to take responsibility for our actions, and to stay human in a complex system. It reminded us too to keep asking better questions, even when the answers aren't easy or quick. These conversations have helped us and the team at Islandbridge find greater clarity in our own purpose, and we hope encouraged others to think deeply about theirs too. If there's one thing we've learned, it's this: purpose isn't something you find once, it's something you practice. So thank you for being part of our path to purpose. If this has resonated, please make sure to share it, follow, and subscribe. All content on High Net Purpose is provided as general information only. It does not constitute any advice, recommendation, or representations, and is not intended to influence listeners or users into making any specific investments or any other decisions. Please be aware that guests and presenters on High Net Purpose may have investments in any of the topics or products being discussed. Their reviews and opinions are their own and should not be taken as endorsements or financial advice. Before making financial decisions, we strongly recommend seeking advice from a qualified financial professional. This podcast may not be copied, reproduced, further distributed, or published in whole or part.